Little girl secretly gave a rescue signal in the restaurant. Vampire King noticed and followed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. On a rainy evening in New York City, the warm glow of lanterns illuminated the upscale restaurant where guests murmured in hushed tones. The scent of roasted meat and fine wine filled the air, and a live jazz band played softly in the background. Among the patrons sat a little girl, no older than 8, in a corner booth, her wide, innocent eyes scanning the room. Her mother, sitting across from her, appeared calm, though there was a subtle unease in the way she glanced over her shoulder every few moments. Little did anyone know, this seemingly peaceful scene was about to take a turn into the unknown. The little girl shifted nervously in her seat, tugging at the hem of her dress. Her fingers clenched around a small napkin, which she had folded into an odd shape, a signal she had learned in the darkest corners of her life. Her mother noticed the napkin, but said nothing. She only gave a quick glance towards the door, as if waiting for someone. Meanwhile, the restaurant's ambience hid the sense of impending danger. Nearby, seated alone at a secluded table, a man dressed in an immaculate black suit observed the scene. Vampire King Lucien Voss, known for his cold demeanor and sharp intellect, had an aura that could chill even the bravest of souls. His piercing amber eyes were unreadable as he took in the room, scanning each guest with subtle precision. He had no reason to pay attention to the little girl. After all, she was merely another face in the crowd. But something about her caught his attention. A flicker of movement, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but not him. She had given a signal. It was a silent call for help, and it was directed to no one in particular. But Lucien noticed. His gaze locked onto the little girl's hand, which was now slowly sliding the napkin across the table. His curiosity piqued. Lucien leaned back in his chair, watching intently. The tension in the room seemed to tighten, as if the world had paused, waiting for the next moment to unfold. Was it a coincidence? Or had he just stumbled upon something far more dangerous than a simple dinner? As the night carried on, Lucien's thoughts circled back to the girl. He had to know more. His instincts told him that something was off, that this little girl was somehow tied to a far larger story. And so, without a second thought, he stood up and started making his way through the room, following the faintest trail of unease that seemed to radiate from her table. His approach was quiet, almost ghostly, but every step was purposeful. The little girl, sensing someone approaching, froze for a moment. Her heart raced in her chest as her eyes nervously shifted toward the man walking toward her. Her mother remained unaware, caught up in her own thoughts, too distracted by the growing discomfort in the air to notice what was happening right under her nose. As Lucien approached the table, his cold eyes never leaving the little girl, she stood up, her tiny hands trembling. She knew something was coming, and it wasn't just the approaching man. With a mix of fear and hope in her eyes, she glanced at her mother, who, still oblivious, looked the other way. Lucien, now standing directly in front of her, bent slightly, his expression softening for the briefest moment. He had seen many things in his long life, but the sight of a child in distress stirred something deep within him. The little girl gulped, not sure whether to speak or run. Her heart pounded in her chest as Lucien's voice broke the silence, low and calm, yet carrying an undeniable command. "Are you in danger, little one?" His voice was smooth, almost comforting, but there was an edge to it that made the air around them feel thick with tension. As Lucien's voice hung in the air, the little girl's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure how to respond to the towering figure standing before her. His presence felt as though it filled the entire room, cold and commanding. Yet there was something unsettlingly kind in the way he looked at her. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her heart raced in her chest, each beat louder than the next. Her tiny hands clutched the edge of the table as her mother continued to talk, oblivious to the scene unfolding in front of her. Lucien could sense the growing fear in the little girl. She wasn't like the other children he had seen, who were either caught up in their own little worlds or too scared to speak to someone like him. No, this one was different. There was an intensity in her eyes, a quiet desperation that drew him in. She was hiding something. Lucien bent down slightly, getting closer to her level. His amber eyes softened just enough to make her feel a little less intimidated. "It's okay," he said, his voice a soothing contrast to the power that radiated from him. "You don't need to be afraid of me." His words didn't have the desired effect. The little girl only stiffened, her wide eyes darting back and forth. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know how to explain it. She couldn't. Not to him. Not to anyone. Lucien straightened up, sensing the unease that still gripped her. He glanced at the door, where two large men stood guard, watching them closely. It seemed they were waiting for him to make a move. He turned back to the little girl, his expression unreadable. He had seen many things in his life, but this child, there was something about her that stirred an ancient feeling inside of him, a feeling he thought he had buried long ago. "Your mother," Lucien began, his voice low but still commanding. "She doesn't know, does she?" The little girl's eyes widened, her lips trembling as she looked up at him. She shook her head slightly, but the movement was barely noticeable. Lucien's gaze softened as he realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a child asking for help. This was a cry for help from someone who had been forced to grow up far too soon. He could see it now, the way she carried herself, the way her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. Lucien's instincts kicked in. He knew what he had to do. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm, but there was a flicker of something else in it. A promise. The little girl looked at him, uncertain. Her eyes darted to her mother, who was still lost in her conversation, and then back to Lucien. She didn't know what to do. She had never been in this situation before. She had never been offered help, not like this. Lucien stepped back slightly, giving her space, but not breaking eye contact. He was giving her a choice, one that no one else had given her before. "It's all right," he reassured her. "I'm not going to hurt you." For a moment, the little girl hesitated. She didn't know if she could trust him. She didn't know if she should trust him. But something in his eyes told her he was different. He wasn't like the others. And maybe, just maybe, he could help. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking as she took her first step away from the table. Lucien watched her carefully, his every movement calculated and precise. He could feel the tension in the air, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not now. Not with her. He gestured toward the door, where two more guards had appeared. "This way," he said, his voice low but firm. The little girl followed him, her small footsteps hesitant, but steady. She didn't look back at her mother, who still hadn't noticed her absence. The restaurant, with its dim lighting and soft murmurs, felt like a distant memory as she stepped into the dark hallway. Lucien led her down the corridor, his presence looming like a shadow over her. She glanced up at him, the question burning in her eyes. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lucien's gaze softened, just for a moment. "Somewhere safe," he replied, his tone steady and reassuring. "You'll be safe there." The little girl nodded, though she didn't understand what he meant. Safe? In a place like this? She didn't know. She didn't know anything anymore. But she trusted him. In that moment, she trusted him. As they reached the end of the hall, Lucien stopped and turned to face her. "You've done well," he said, his voice almost gentle. "But we're not finished yet." The little girl looked up at him, confused. What did he mean? What was going to happen next? She couldn't know. She had no idea that the danger she had faced tonight was just the beginning. Lucien opened a door and gestured for her to enter. The room beyond was dark, with only the faintest light coming from a single lamp in the corner. It felt like a safe haven, but the little girl couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Lucien stepped inside behind her, closing the door softly. "Rest for now," he said, his voice now almost tender. "You're safe here." The little girl nodded again, though she still had no idea what the future held. All she knew was that she was no longer alone. And that thought, for the first time in a long time, brought her a sliver of peace. As the door clicked shut behind Lucien, the little girl stood frozen for a moment in the dim room. It was quiet, almost eerily so, with only the faint light of a lamp casting long shadows against the walls. She had never been in a place like this before. The room was large, though sparsely furnished, with a few pieces of elegant, antique furniture that spoke of old money and secrets. A deep, comfortable-looking chair sat in the corner, its fabric a rich, dark green that contrasted with the gray stone walls. But despite its comfort, the room felt cold. Cold in a way she couldn't fully explain. Lucien's presence filled the space, and even though he wasn't saying anything, she could feel him watching her carefully. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible. She didn't know whether to sit, speak, or just stand there in silence, waiting for him to tell her what to do. Lucien's eyes, however, never left her. There was something intense in them, something that felt ancient and untouchable. It made her heart race. Yet, she could feel a strange sense of calm wash over her too. He wasn't like anyone she had ever met. He wasn't like the people who had hurt her or the ones who had ignored her cries for help. Lucien was something else entirely. Something beyond her understanding. "You're safe here," Lucien finally spoke, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet but filled with authority. "I promise." His words weren't just for her. They were for himself as well. He had made a promise to protect her the moment he saw the distress in her eyes. He could see through the walls she had built, walls that had been built by years of hiding, of pretending everything was fine. He had seen the signs, the small gestures she made, the way she communicated without speaking. He could tell that this was not just an ordinary child. She had been through things that no one her age should ever endure. She had been marked by hardship and fear in ways he had only ever seen in people much older than her. Lucien stepped toward her slowly, his movements deliberate, measured. He didn't want to make her feel cornered, but he needed to understand. She needed to understand. "You're not alone anymore," he continued, his tone gentle, though there was still that underlying power that made his words feel like undeniable truth. The little girl hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor as she struggled to find her voice. It was hard to trust anyone. She had learned that the hard way. People promise things, but those promises were often empty. She had been disappointed too many times to believe in anyone now. But somehow, she couldn't shake the feeling that Lucien was different, that there was something real behind his words. Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the question that had been on her mind since she first noticed his gaze on her in the restaurant. He could have ignored her, just like everyone else. But he hadn't. He had seen her, really seen her, in a way no one else had. Lucien's expression softened just a fraction, and for a moment, the hard, distant facade slipped away, revealing a glimpse of something more vulnerable. "Because I can," he answered simply, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because I've seen what happens when people like you are left to face the world alone. I won't let that happen to you." There was no arrogance in his voice, no pride, just a quiet conviction. The little girl looked up at him, the weight of his words settling heavily on her chest. She had never had someone say something like that to her before. Never had someone care enough to offer her protection without expecting anything in return. She didn't know what to think. She had never felt safe, never trusted anyone enough to let them help her. But there was something about Lucien, something about the way he carried himself, that made her want to believe. "I don't understand," she said softly, her confusion clear in her eyes. "Why me? Why would you want to help me?" Lucien paused, his gaze flicking to the window, where the night outside seemed to press against the glass, dark and endless. He had spent centuries watching people, studying them, learning how to navigate the complicated, often painful world of human interactions. But this was different. He had been drawn to her from the moment their eyes had met, not just because she had sent out a distress signal, but because he sensed something within her, something familiar, something that mirrored his own past. "Because you're not just any child," he said, his voice quieter now, as though speaking the truth aloud made it more real. "You've seen things. You've experienced things that no one your age should have to. And in you, I see the possibility of something more. Something important." The little girl's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she could feel the weight of his words. She had always been told she was nothing, that she was just a poor girl, a nobody. But here, in this strange, cold room, with a man who seemed to know more about her than anyone ever had, she felt seen. And that feeling, for the first time in her life, made her feel like she might be more than just a shadow in the dark. Lucien turned back to her, his gaze firm but gentle. "For now, you need rest. Tomorrow, we'll talk more. I'll help you, but you must trust me." The little girl nodded slowly, unsure of what the future held, But for the first time in a long while, she felt the smallest spark of hope. Lucien's promise, his presence, was enough to let her finally relax. As she lay down on the plush bed that had been set up for her, her eyes closed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to sleep, knowing she was not alone. Knowing that, at least for now, she was safe. The following morning, the dim light of dawn crept through the thick curtains, casting a soft glow over the room. The little girl stirred. In her bed, the sheets tangled around her small frame. She woke slowly, her mind still clouded by the remnants of the strange dreams she had while asleep. For the first time in what felt like forever, she had slept peacefully, without fear. But as she lay there, the events of the night before came rushing back. Lucien, the Vampire King. His words. She wasn't sure what to think. Was she truly safe now? Could she trust him? The questions swirled in her mind as she slowly pushed herself up, her feet meeting the cold floor. Her gaze drifted toward the door, and for a moment, she hesitated. What was waiting for her outside? Was she truly free of the dangers she had known for so long? Before she could dwell on it too much, the door to her room creaked open, and Lucien stepped inside. He was dressed in his usual dark attire, his presence as commanding as ever. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth and calm, but with an underlying edge that made it clear he was not here for small talk. "Are you feeling better?" The little girl nodded, not trusting herself to speak just yet. Her throat felt tight, and for a moment, the weight of her emotions seemed to choke her. She wanted to ask him a million questions, but her voice betrayed her. Lucien observed her quietly, his amber eyes searching her face as if he could read her thoughts. "You have questions," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You have every right to be confused." He paused for a moment, as if weighing his next words. "But I promise you this. I will protect you. No one will hurt you again." The little girl blinked, her heart racing. His words were like a balm to her soul, soothing the raw fear that had been a constant companion for so long. She didn't know if she fully believed him, but something about the way he spoke, the way he held himself, made her want to trust him. Lucien stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he continued. "You're safe here with me." She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. "But why me?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucien's expression softened, though there was still that inscrutable air about him. "Because you're not like the others," he replied, his tone laced with something she couldn't quite place. "You have a strength within you that even you might not fully understand yet. You've endured things most people wouldn't survive, and that makes you stronger than you realize." The little girl's eyes widened at his words. Strength? She didn't feel strong. She didn't feel like anything other than a frightened child trying to survive in a world that seemed so much bigger and more dangerous than she could ever handle. But there was something in Lucien's eyes that made her wonder. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was stronger than she knew. As if reading her thoughts, Lucien gave a slight nod. "I know you don't understand now," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "But you will. In time you will." A silence settled between them, thick and heavy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The little girl felt a sense of calm wash over her, but it was tempered by the fear still gnawing at the back of her mind. She had been safe before, and it hadn't lasted. How could she be sure this time would be different? Lucien seemed to sense her unease. He turned and gestured toward the door. "Come with me," he said, his voice soft yet commanding. "There's someone I want you to meet." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Slowly, she followed him as he led her out of the room. The hallway was quiet, and the cold stone floors echoed beneath their footsteps. Lucien moved with a grace that was almost otherworldly, and she found herself unconsciously matching his pace. As they walked through the corridors, the little girl couldn't help but feel that she was in a completely different world. The mansion was vast, its architecture grand and intimidating, with towering columns and elegant tapestries hanging from the walls. It felt like something out of a storybook, and for a moment, she wondered if she had somehow stepped into a dream. Finally, they reached a large set of double doors. Lucien paused before them, turning to her with a serious expression. "You need to understand," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "What happens next is important. You have a role to play in this." The little girl looked up at him, confusion and fear battling in her chest. "A role?" she echoed. Lucien nodded. Yes. But for now, all you need to know is that you're not alone. You're part of something much bigger than yourself. He pushed the doors open, revealing a large, lavishly decorated room. At the center stood a tall figure, his back to them. As he turned around, the little girl gasped. It was a man, but not just any man. He radiated power, his eyes dark and intense, his features sharp and regal. He was older than Lucien, though there was an undeniable familiarity in his eyes. This is my father, Lucien said, his voice tinged with respect. King Voss. The little girl stood frozen, her heart racing in her chest. What was this place? Who were these people? And why did it feel like her entire life was about to change in ways she couldn't even begin to understand? Lucien stood quietly beside the door as his father, King Voss, turned his piercing gaze on the little girl. There was a heavy silence in the room, the air thick with anticipation. The little girl couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment, the pressure of the unknown pressing down on her. She shifted uncomfortably on her feet, looking between Lucien and the king, unsure of what to expect next. King Voss studied her intently, his eyes not unkind but searching, as if trying to decipher something hidden within her. The room felt cold, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch as if alive, observing the scene. So, this is the girl. King Voss finally spoke, his voice deep and commanding. The one you've taken under your protection. His words weren't accusatory, but they carried an air of finality. Lucien nodded, his usual confidence evident, though his posture remained respectful. Yes, father. She is more than she appears. The king's eyes flicked toward Lucien, narrowing slightly. There was a moment of tension between them, an unspoken communication that only those who had lived centuries could understand. The king then shifted his gaze back to the little girl, his expression softening, though not by much. I can feel it, he said, almost to himself. The power inside her. It's familiar. The little girl's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what they were talking about. She only knew that she had been through more than any child should ever face. She had seen and heard things no one should ever have to. But power? What power? She was just a scared little girl who had been trying to survive. Lucien stepped forward, breaking the silence that had settled in the room. She's not just any child, father. She's been marked by something ancient, something that could change everything we know. The king raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but also cautious. Marked, he repeated. Lucien nodded solemnly. Her past, it's tangled with something older than either of us. I believe she has a role to play, something that could help us protect our world. Or destroy it. The little girl felt a chill run through her. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what they were saying. She had always been told she was nothing, that she would never be anyone. But now they were talking about her like she was a key to something much bigger, something dangerous. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What do you mean? What role do I have? Lucien turned to her, his gaze softening, though there was still an edge of seriousness to it. I know this is confusing, he said gently. But you have to understand, the world you know is just a small piece of a much larger picture. There are forces out there, ancient powers that even we do not fully comprehend. But you have been touched by one of them. She looked up at him, fear and confusion swirling in her chest. Touched? By who? By what? By the same force that has shaped our world for centuries, Lucien explained, his tone calm, yet filled with an unsettling truth. The magic that lies beneath everything, behind every vampire, every king, every kingdom. And you, little one, are tied to it in a way that even you may not yet understand. The king spoke then, his voice low but steady. You are not the only one who has been touched by this power. There are others, those who seek to control it for themselves. And that is why you must learn how to harness it, how to protect it. The little girl could feel her heart pounding in her chest as the weight of their words settled in. She had never asked for this. She had never wanted to be a part of anything so grand, so dangerous. But now, she was standing in the midst of it. Lucien knelt down in front of her, bringing himself to her level. His eyes were intense but kind, his expression one of understanding. I know this is overwhelming, he said softly. But you're not alone. We will teach you, guide you. You don't have to face this alone. His words were reassuring, but the little girl still felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had been through so much already, and now, It seemed like there was even more to carry. The king observed her quietly for a moment before speaking again. Lucien is right. You have a gift, one that could change everything. But there are dangers, too. Forces that will stop at nothing to claim you and your power for their own. You must learn to control it, to protect yourself, and to protect those you care about. The little girl's head spun. She had come here thinking she would finally be safe, away from the people who had hurt her. But now, she was being told that she was part of something far bigger and far more dangerous than she could have imagined. She didn't know if she was ready for this, if she was even capable of understanding what was happening. But one thing was clear, there was no going back now. She was a part of this world now, a world filled with vampires, magic, and ancient powers. And whether she was ready or not, she had to face it. Lucien stood up, his expression serious. We'll start your training soon, he said. But for now, you should rest. There's much to learn, and it won't be easy. But we'll be with you every step of the way. The little girl nodded, though she still felt uncertain. She didn't know what her future held, but she knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same again. The following day, the little girl found herself in a vast, unfamiliar training room. It was a stark contrast to the cold, dark halls she had walked through the night before. The room was filled with strange symbols, old books stacked high on shelves, and weapons that looked far too dangerous for someone her age. Lucien stood at the center of the room, his posture as commanding as ever. He had told her that training would begin soon, but she had no idea what to expect. She had no training, no special skills. She was just a scared little girl who had been trying to survive. Yet, here she was, standing in a place that seemed made for warriors, not children. Lucien turned to face her as she entered the room, his amber eyes as intense as ever. You're ready, he said. His voice was steady, reassuring, but there was an undertone of something else, determination, maybe even hope. Today, you'll start learning how to control what's inside you. The little girl looked around the room, feeling the weight of Lucien's words settle on her shoulders. She had no idea what kind of power he was talking about. All she knew was that her life had been turned upside down in the span of a single night. She couldn't go back to the life she had known. It felt like everything she had ever understood was now slipping through her fingers. I don't know what you mean, she said softly, her voice trembling. What's inside me? Lucien's gaze softened just a fraction, though the gravity of the situation remained. You carry a power that you don't yet understand, he explained, stepping closer to her. A power that's been buried deep inside you. It's time to awaken it. The little girl's heart pounded in her chest. Power? She didn't feel powerful. She didn't feel anything like the people who had hurt her, the ones who seemed to control everything around her. She was just a little girl trying to survive. But I don't want to hurt anyone, she whispered, looking up at Lucien with wide, fearful eyes. I don't want to be like them. Lucien's expression softened further. You won't, he reassured her. The power inside you is not about hurting. It's about protecting. You've been through more than anyone should have to endure, and now you're learning how to protect yourself. And others. There was something about his words that made the little girl feel slightly less afraid. She had always been told that she was weak, that she couldn't protect herself. But Lucien was right. She had survived. She had made it this far. Maybe she had more strength inside her than she realized. Lucien led her to the center of the room, where a strange, glowing symbol was carved into the floor. It seemed to pulse with energy, almost as if it were alive. He knelt down beside it, gesturing for her to do the same. This is where you'll start, he said. Here, you'll begin to understand the power you've been given. The little girl looked at the symbol, hesitant. She had no idea how to do anything like this. What if she failed? What if she hurt someone by accident? But Lucien's calm presence made her feel like she could try, at least. She knelt beside him, placing her hand on the glowing symbol. At first, nothing happened. The symbol remained still, its glow faint and unchanging. But then, she felt it, like a pull inside her chest, a tugging sensation that was impossible to ignore. It was as if something deep within her was waking up, stretching, ready to break free. She gasped, pulling her hand back in surprise, but Lucien was there to steady her. It's all right, he said softly. Don't pull away. Let it flow through you. You control it, not the other way around. The little girl took a deep breath and placed her hand back on the symbol. this time focusing on the strange energy she could feel stirring within her. As soon as her hand made contact, a surge of power seemed to rush through her, like electricity coursing through her veins. She gasped, her heart pounding in her chest, but this time, she didn't pull away. The power felt different, not scary, but unfamiliar, like something that had always been there but had never been allowed to surface. Good. Lucien's voice was gentle, but filled with approval. You're doing it. You're awakening the power inside you. The little girl focused harder, her hand pressed firmly against the symbol. She could feel it now, the pulse of energy inside her, beating in time with her own heartbeat. The more she focused, the more it seemed to grow, like a flame that was flickering to life. Her vision blurred for a moment, and she felt her body shift slightly, as if the very air around her had changed. Don't be afraid, Lucien whispered. It's a part of you now. You don't need to control it all at once. Just let it flow, and it will come to you. Slowly, the glowing symbol beneath her hand began to pulse brighter, stronger. It was as though the energy had been unlocked, and now it was responding to her. She could feel her body filling with something new, something powerful, but it wasn't overwhelming. It felt right. She wasn't just a helpless child anymore. She was becoming something more, something stronger. She slowly removed her hand from the symbol, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she stood up, feeling a strange sense of accomplishment. Lucien was watching her closely, his eyes filled with a quiet pride. Well done, he said. You've taken the first step. You're learning how to wield the power within you. But remember, this is only the beginning. There's much more to learn, and you'll need to master it if you're to protect yourself and the ones you care about. The little girl nodded, her hands shaking slightly from the energy that had just surged through her. She didn't fully understand what had happened, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She had power, and she was going to learn how to use it. Lucien's gaze softened as he stepped closer. You're not alone, he said. We'll do this together. And for the first time in her life, the little girl allowed herself to believe it. She wasn't alone. She was part of something much bigger now, and maybe, just maybe, she could make a difference. Days passed, and with each one, the little girl grew stronger. The training sessions with Lucien had become routine, but no less intense. She had learned to harness the strange, pulsing energy within her, to call it forth when needed, and even to calm it when it became overwhelming. But there was still so much more to learn, so much more to understand. Lucien had been patient with her, guiding her through every step. He had shown her how to meditate, how to connect with the power inside her in ways that felt both foreign and familiar. The glow of the symbol had faded from the floor, but it lingered in her memory, like an imprint of what was to come. It wasn't just about the power. It was about control. Lucien had made that clear from the beginning. He had taught her that true strength came not from the energy itself, but from her ability to control it, to not let it control her. The little girl stood now in the center of the training room, her eyes closed, her breathing steady. Lucien watched from a distance, his eyes sharp, his arms crossed. Focus, he said softly. Let the power flow through you. Don't fight it. Let it be a part of you. She nodded, her fingers tingling with the energy that swirled just beneath her skin. It was like a fire, flickering and dancing, waiting for her to direct it. She had felt its warmth many times before, but today, it felt different. Today, it felt like it was ready to explode, like it was begging to be set free. Slowly, she raised her hands, palms facing the floor. She could feel the power coursing through her veins, like a heartbeat of its own. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself, remembering Lucien's words. It's not about force. It's about balance. She exhaled slowly, concentrating on the sensation in her chest, on the pulse of the power inside her. She imagined it spreading through her body, flooding her limbs, filling every inch of her being with warmth and strength. The air around her seemed to hum, and the room itself seemed to bend, the shadows on the walls shifting, twisting. For a moment, she thought she might lose control. But then, just as quickly as the surge had come, she felt the power settle, calm, as if it had obeyed her command. She opened her eyes, breathless, and looked at Lucien. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, pride, perhaps, or approval. Well done, he said quietly. You're learning. The little girl smiled slightly, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She had done well, but she still didn't fully understand what she was doing or why it was so important. She was still just a child, after all, still trying to figure out where she belonged in a world that seemed so vast and dangerous. "How do I know if I'm ready?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with a quiet uncertainty. Lucien's gaze softened, and he walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You'll know when the time comes," he said. "There's no rush. But you must be prepared for what lies ahead. There are forces out there that will stop at nothing to control you, to control the power you hold. And when that time comes, you must be ready to protect yourself." The little girl looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of reassurance. She didn't know what he meant by forces or the time, but she knew he was right. She had seen enough in her short life to understand that there were people out there who would hurt her, who would take advantage of her if given the chance. But what could she do? She was just a child. Lucien seemed to read her thoughts, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You're not just a child anymore," he said, his voice firm. "You have the strength inside you. You just have to believe in it." The little girl nodded, though she wasn't sure if she truly believed him. She had spent so long feeling weak, so long wondering if she was strong enough to survive. But now, standing in this room, with Lucien's words ringing in her ears, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could be more than what she had been. "I'll be ready," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet resolve. Lucien smiled, a rare smile that reached his eyes. "I know you will be." The next few days were a blur of training, lessons, and moments of reflection. The little girl spent hours with Lucien, learning how to control the power within her, how to use it for protection, for strength. She learned how to manipulate the energy, shaping it into something that felt like an extension of herself. But there were still moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she was truly ready, if she could ever be. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, Lucien took her aside. "Tomorrow, we're going to take the next step," he said. "You'll face something real. It's time for you to understand what it means to protect yourself." The little girl's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he meant, but she could feel the weight of his words. She had been training for this, hadn't she? To protect herself, to use her power. But what if she wasn't ready? What if she failed? Lucien placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip gentle but firm. "Trust yourself," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "I know you're ready. And no matter what happens, I'll be here." The little girl took a deep breath, nodding as she gathered her courage. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing. She was no longer the scared little girl she had once been. She had power now, and with that power, she would find a way to protect herself and the ones she cared about. The next day, the little girl woke up early, her heart pounding with anticipation. Lucien had promised her that today, she would face something real, something that would test her abilities and prepare her for whatever dangers lay ahead. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just training anymore. This was the beginning of something much bigger. She stood up from the bed and stretched, her muscles still sore from the previous day's exercises. Every part of her body felt alive, connected to the power she had been learning to control. It was a strange feeling, like she had unlocked something inside herself that she never knew existed. The power was both exhilarating and terrifying, and she wasn't sure if she could always control it. But Lucien had taught her to focus, to direct it, and most importantly, not to fear it. As she dressed, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was her chance to prove herself, to show that she was more than just a scared child, more than just someone who had been pushed around by the world. She was stronger now, and she had the power to protect herself. She could hear Lucien's voice in her mind, reminding her to trust herself. She had to believe in the strength he saw in her. After a quick breakfast, she joined Lucien in the training room. He was already there, waiting for her, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady. The little girl nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. What would she face today? What would this test be like? Lucien gave her a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know you're nervous. That's normal. But remember, you've been training for this. You can do it." She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Lucien motioned for her to follow him, leading her out of the training room and down a long corridor. The air felt heavier now, thick with the promise of something important. They reached a door at the end of the hall, one that the little girl had never noticed before. It was smaller than the others, hidden away in the corner. Lucien opened the door and gestured for her to step inside. The room beyond was dimly lit, the walls lined with old, worn bookshelves and strange artifacts. In the center of the room was a large stone pedestal, and on top of it, a glowing crystal. The crystal pulsed softly, casting an eerie light around the room. The little girl stepped closer, feeling the pull of the crystal. It felt familiar, like it was calling to her. Lucien stood behind her, his presence a quiet reassurance. "This," he said, "is the source of the power you carry." She looked at him, confused. "But I thought my power came from inside me." Lucien nodded. "It does. But the crystal amplifies it, helps you understand it. It's a connection to the ancient forces that shaped this world. And now, it's connected to you." The little girl's heart beat faster. The crystal? She hadn't known anything about it. But somehow, standing in front of it, she felt a strange sense of destiny. "What do I do with it?" she asked. Lucien's eyes glimmered with quiet pride. "Touch it. Let it guide you." Hesitantly, the little girl reached out with her trembling hand. The moment her fingers brushed the surface of the crystal, she felt a surge of energy. It was as if the room itself came alive, the walls pulsing with light and energy. She gasped, stumbling back, but Lucien caught her arm to steady her. "Focus," he said gently. "It's not a threat. It's an ally. Trust it." The little girl took a deep breath, her fingers still tingling from the touch of the crystal. Slowly, she placed her hand back on it. The light around her grew brighter, and she felt the power flowing through her again. This time, she didn't pull back. She allowed the energy to flood her, filling her body, making her feel alive in a way she never had before. The world around her seemed to blur, and she could hear whispers, voices from the past, from the ancient ones who had first discovered the power she now possessed. She closed her eyes, allowing the whispers to wash over her, guiding her, teaching her. The power was not just inside her, it was everywhere. It was in the earth, in the air, in the very fabric of the world. And it was hers to command. When she opened her eyes again, the crystal's glow had dimmed, but the energy inside her had not. It was still there, thrumming quietly, waiting for her command. Lucien was watching her closely, his expression unreadable. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. The little girl took a step back, her breath still coming in quick, shallow gasps. "I did it," she whispered. "I felt it." Lucien nodded, his lips curving into a faint smile. "You did more than that. You've connected with the source. You've taken control." The little girl's heart swelled with pride, but there was still a part of her that was unsure. What did this mean? What did it all mean for her future? Lucien seemed to sense her lingering doubts. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "You've learned how to harness the power. But now, you must learn how to use it to protect. There will be dangers ahead. You must be ready." She nodded, her resolve hardening. She had been afraid before, but now, standing here with the power inside her, she didn't feel so small. She didn't feel so helpless. She was ready for whatever came next. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger than before. Lucien's smile deepened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Good. Because this world is about to change, and you'll play a big part in that." The little girl looked up at him, her heart steady. She was no longer just a child hiding in the shadows. She was becoming something more, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The following week, the little girl felt like everything had changed. She had spent the last few days training more intensively with Lucien, learning how to control the power inside her. The glow from the crystal was still vivid in her memory, and every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the energy humming through her veins. It was exhilarating, but also overwhelming. For the first time in her life, she understood that she was no longer just a helpless child. She had power now, power she had to learn to control. Lucien had been a patient teacher, but the lessons had grown more difficult, more intense. She was learning how to tap into her abilities, how to focus the energy and direct it where she needed. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the power surged out of her control, causing things around her to crack or shatter. But Lucien was always there, steady and composed, guiding her through it. He had told her from the start that this was a long journey, and that she would have to face things she wasn't ready for. But he had also told her that the moment she accepted her power, the moment she embraced it, she would become unstoppable. She wasn't sure if she believed that yet, but she had come a long way from the scared, fragile girl who had walked into this mansion. And today, something felt different. Lucien had told her that today she would face her first real test, that the time had come for her to confront something beyond the training room. She didn't know what it would be, but her heart raced with both fear and excitement. She knew she wasn't ready, not fully, but she had no choice. She had to face whatever it was. Lucien appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "It's time," he said simply, his voice calm, but with an edge of urgency. The little girl nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had been training for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt the weight of her responsibilities crash down on her. She wasn't just training to protect herself anymore. She was training to protect others, to fight against the forces that were threatening everything she had come to care about. Lucien led her down the long, cold hallway to a small, dimly lit room that she had never seen before. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with an unfamiliar energy. There were no windows, no doors except the one they had entered. It felt like a trap, but Lucien didn't seem concerned. He turned to her, his face serious. "This is your test. You will face an illusion, your greatest fear, something that will try to make you doubt yourself. You must push through it. Don't let it control you. Remember who you are." The little girl looked at him, her heart racing. She didn't know what kind of illusion awaited her, but she was terrified of what it might be. What if it was something she couldn't defeat? Lucien must have sensed her fear, because he placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch steady and reassuring. "You've come this far. You're stronger than you think." She nodded, though she wasn't sure if she truly believed it. Lucien stepped back, his eyes never leaving her. "I'll be here, watching, but you must do this on your own." With that, the room seemed to shift. The walls began to close in, and the air became thicker, suffocating. The little girl's breath quickened, and she felt the familiar sting of panic rise in her chest. Her hands shook at her sides, and for a moment, she was paralyzed by the fear that had plagued her for so long. But then, she remembered Lucien's words. "You're stronger than you think." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center herself. Slowly, the panic began to subside, but it was replaced by something even more unsettling. The air around her shifted again, and when she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the room with Lucien. She stood in a dark, desolate street. The buildings around her were broken and abandoned, and the sky above was clouded with an eerie, unnatural fog. She looked down at herself, and her heart sank. She was a little girl again, smaller, weaker, vulnerable. Her body ached with hunger, and the world around her felt cold and empty. She had been here before. This was the same street she had run through when she was younger, when she had fled from the people who had hurt her. The memories flooded back, and she could feel the same fear crawling up her spine. She was alone. No one was there to protect her. She was trapped in the past, and the weight of it threatened to crush her. As she stood there, frozen, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around and saw them. The figures from her past, the people who had tormented her, who had made her feel small and helpless. They were walking toward her, their faces distorted and cruel. "You're nothing," one of them sneered. "You'll always be weak. You'll always be afraid." The little girl's knees buckled, and she fell to the ground. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The fear was suffocating. She couldn't escape. She was trapped in the nightmare. But then, something inside her shifted. A surge of power, of energy, began to rise up from within. She remembered Lucien's words again. She wasn't the scared little girl anymore. She was stronger than this. The figures loomed closer, but instead of running, she stood up, her hands clenched into fists. The power inside her pulsed, and she could feel it responding to her anger, to her desire to fight. She wasn't weak. She wasn't helpless. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her newfound strength. "I'm not afraid anymore." With a deep breath, she reached out, and the power surged through her, pushing the figures back. They screamed in fear, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The street faded, and the room around her returned. She stood there, panting, her heart still racing, but the fear was gone. Lucien stepped forward, his face unreadable, but there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Well done," he said quietly. "You've faced your fear, and you've overcome it. You've taken the first step toward becoming who you were always meant to be." The little girl stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. She had done it. She had faced her greatest fear, and she had come out the other side stronger. Lucien was right. She was no longer just a child. She was something more, and she was ready for whatever came next. The days after her first test passed in a blur. The little girl had felt something shift inside her after facing the illusion of her past fears. The weight of it all was heavy, but Lucien had been right. She was stronger than she had ever believed. The power inside her had awakened in a way she couldn't have imagined, and with each passing day, she grew more confident in her abilities. Lucien continued her training, pushing her to learn control, focus, and discipline. It was not enough just to have power, she had to know how to wield it. But even though the lessons were intense, the little girl began to feel more comfortable with the energy within her. She had faced her greatest fear and survived. That alone gave her a sense of pride, but there was still so much to learn. Lucien had promised that she would have another test, one that would push her even further. He had said it was time for her to understand the true consequences of the power she now possessed, but he never explained what that would entail. The little girl tried not to let the uncertainty bother her. She was determined to prove herself, to show that she could handle whatever came next. Lucien led her to a new part of the mansion one morning, a corridor she hadn't yet explored. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries and portraits of long-forgotten figures, each one staring down at her with eyes full of history. She felt a strange sense of awe as she walked beside Lucien, his presence steadying her as always. They reached a large wooden door, intricately carved with symbols she didn't recognize. Lucien paused and turned to her. "This is where you'll begin to understand the true power of what you carry," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension. "You've learned control, but now you need to understand what's at stake. There are things in this world that will stop at nothing to control the power you hold. They will come for you, and when they do, you must be ready." The little girl swallowed, her throat dry. Her mind raced as she wondered what was on the other side of the door. Lucien opened it, revealing a large, circular room filled with strange glowing orbs that floated midair. The air was thick with magic, and the floor was covered with symbols that seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. In the center of the room stood a tall figure, cloaked in shadow. Lucien stepped aside, allowing the little girl to enter. "This is a guardian," he explained. "It will test you. It is not an illusion this time. It is real." The little girl's heart skipped a beat. "A test? What kind of test?" The figure in the center of the room stirred, and suddenly, the shadows seemed to coalesce into a physical form. A pair of glowing eyes appeared from within the darkness, staring down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. She instinctively took a step back, but Lucien's voice stopped her. "Stay focused," he said. "It won't harm you if you don't let it. Face it with your strength." She nodded, trying to steady her breathing. This was different from the last test. There was nothing illusionary about this. It was real. The figure took a step forward, its shadowy form moving with an unnerving grace. Its eyes locked onto hers, and she could feel the weight of its gaze, as if it was searching deep into her soul. The power inside her stirred, responding to the challenge, but she couldn't let it control her. She had learned that much already. The figure spoke, its voice like the sound of shifting winds. "You think you are ready?" it asked, its tone mocking. "You think you can control the darkness inside you?" The little girl swallowed hard. She didn't know how to answer. She had no idea what the figure meant by darkness. She had only ever known the power within her, and she had only learned how to control it. She didn't know if she was ready. But Lucien's voice echoed in her mind. Asterisk, "You're stronger than you think." Asterisk, she took a deep breath and stood tall. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her chest. The figure tilted its head, studying her. "We'll see," it replied, its voice sending a shiver down her spine. Without warning, it lunged toward her. The little girl didn't have time to think. Instinctively, she raised her hands, and the power inside her surged forward. It was like a wave crashing against the figure, pushing it back with the force of the energy. But the figure was relentless. It came at her again, its form shifting into something more monstrous, its eyes glowing brighter. The little girl stumbled back, her power flickering for a moment, but she caught herself. Lucien's words filled her mind once more. Asterisk, don't let it control you. Asterisk, she focused, drawing the power back to herself. This time, she directed it more precisely. She didn't let it explode out of her uncontrolled. She channeled it, shaping it into a barrier in front of her. The figure struck again, but this time, it met the barrier, its attack blocked by the force of her power. It recoiled, its glowing eyes narrowing. Impressive, it murmured, but there was something colder in its voice now, as though it recognized the challenge. The little girl didn't give in to fear. She pushed forward, the power growing stronger in her hands, ready for the next move. She knew this was a test of more than just her strength. It was a test of her resolve. The figure shifted again, faster this time, but the little girl was ready. With a cry, she released the energy in a concentrated blast, sending it straight toward the figure. It struck the shadowy form with a force that echoed through the room. The figure screamed, its form dissipating into the air like smoke. The room fell silent. The little girl stood, panting, her heart racing. Lucien stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "You've passed," he said, his voice low but filled with approval. "You didn't just face the test. You controlled it. You didn't let it overwhelm you." She looked up at him, her chest still heaving from the exertion. She wasn't sure if she was truly ready, but in that moment, she felt like she had taken a step closer to understanding who she really was. She wasn't just a scared little girl anymore. She was something more, something powerful, and she was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed her trial in the shadowy room were a mix of quiet reflection and renewed training. Lucien continued to push her further, but now there was a difference in the way she approached her lessons. The little girl no longer felt like a helpless child, fumbling her way through unknown power. She had faced a fear that threatened to consume her, and she had beaten it. The power inside her felt more like a part of her now, something she could channel and control. But even as she grew stronger, there was a quiet part of her that feared what the future held. Lucien had warned her that there were forces out there, ancient, powerful beings that would stop at nothing to control her. She had to be ready for them. And now, she felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders. One morning, after a particularly difficult session where Lucien had pushed her limits, he led her to the training room once more. This time, however, the atmosphere felt different. There was an edge to it, a tension that the little girl couldn't shake. Lucien stood across from her, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You've come far," he said, his voice steady. "But there's more you need to know. It's time for you to face a real threat." The little girl's heart skipped a beat. "A real threat," she echoed. Lucien nodded. "Yes, you've learned how to control your power. But now you need to understand how to use it in the face of danger. And trust me, danger is not something we can avoid forever." She swallowed, her stomach tightening. Lucien had always been calm, almost detached at times, but now there was a seriousness to his tone that made her realize how real this was. The little girl had been training to defend herself, but had never faced a true enemy, until now. "I'm ready," she said, though doubt crept into her voice. "I will be." Lucien studied her for a moment, then nodded, as if satisfied with her answer. He stepped aside, gesturing to a large door at the back of the room. "Through there," he said. "You'll find out what I mean." She hesitated only for a moment before walking toward the door. Her hand shook as she reached for the handle, but she forced herself to steady it. This was it. She was going to face whatever challenge Lucien had prepared for her. The door creaked open, and she stepped into a darkened room. The air felt colder here, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally across the floor. The little girl's pulse quickened as she looked around. She could feel the power around her, like a tangible weight pressing down on her. Lucien's voice echoed through the room. "It's not enough to just have power. You need to know how to use it to defend what matters." Suddenly, the shadows in the room began to shift. The little girl's breath caught in her throat as figures began to materialize from the darkness. They were tall, their forms cloaked in shadow, their eyes glowing faintly with an eerie light. They stepped toward her, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were studying her. She stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. These were the dangers Lucien had warned her about, the enemies that would come for her, for the power inside her. Her hands tingled as she felt the energy within her stir, ready to respond to the threat. Lucien's voice came again, soft but firm. Focus. Remember what you've learned. Don't let fear control you. The little girl took a deep breath, grounding herself in the training she had received. She reached deep inside, feeling for the power that had become so familiar to her. The figures closed in, their movements growing faster, more aggressive. She raised her hand, and with a surge of energy, she released a burst of force, sending it toward the figures. It struck them with a loud crack, but they didn't falter. Instead, they advanced even faster. Panic rose in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had to control the power. She couldn't let it control her. The figures were closing in on her now, and she felt their presence like a suffocating weight. She had no choice. With a sharp breath, she let the power flow through her fully, directing it with every ounce of strength she had. The air around her seemed to crackle as she unleashed another wave of energy. This time, the figures staggered, their forms flickering in and out of existence as if her power was tearing through them. They screamed in distorted voices, their glowing eyes dimming as they tried to retreat into the shadows. But the little girl wasn't finished. She had faced her fear before, and she wouldn't back down now. With a cry, she focused all the energy she could muster into one final strike. The figures screamed as they were engulfed in the force of her power, disappearing into the ether with a burst of light. The room fell silent. The little girl stood, breathing heavily, her hands still trembling from the exertion. She had done it. She had faced the enemy and defeated it. Lucien appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he observed the scene. "You did well," he said, his voice low. "You've learned how to defend yourself. But remember, this is only the beginning. There will be more challenges ahead. And next time, the stakes will be higher." The little girl nodded, though her heart was still racing. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. She wasn't the same person who had first stepped into this mansion. She was stronger now, more capable, and ready to face whatever came next. She had control over the power inside her, and with Lucien's guidance, she would continue to grow stronger. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a fighter, and she was ready for whatever the world would throw at her. The days that followed her trial in the shadowy room were a mix of quiet reflection and renewed training. Lucien continued to push her further, but now there was a difference in the way she approached her lessons. The little girl no longer felt like a helpless child, fumbling her way through unknown power. She had faced a fear that threatened to consume her, and she had beaten it. The power inside her felt more like a part of her now, something she could channel and control. But even as she grew stronger, there was a quiet part of her that feared what the future held. Lucien had warned her that there were forces out there, ancient, powerful beings that would stop at nothing to control her. She had to be ready for them. And now, she felt the weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders. One morning, after a particularly difficult session where Lucien had pushed her limits, he led her to the training room once more. This time, however, the atmosphere felt different. There was an edge to it, a tension that the little girl couldn't shake. Lucien stood across from her, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "You've come far," he said, his voice steady. "But there's more you need to know. It's time for you to face a real threat." The little girl's heart skipped a beat. "A real threat," she echoed. Lucien nodded. "Yes, you've learned how to control your power. But now you need to understand how to use it in the face of danger. And trust me, danger is not something we can avoid forever." She swallowed, her stomach tightening. Lucien had always been calm, almost detached at times, but now there was a seriousness to his tone that made her realize how real this was. The little girl had been training to defend herself, but had never faced a true enemy, until now. "I'm ready," she said, though doubt crept into her voice. "I will be." Lucien studied her for a moment, then nodded, as if satisfied with her answer. He stepped aside, gesturing to a large door at the back of the room. "Through there," he said. "You'll find out what I mean." She hesitated only for a moment before walking toward the door. Her hand shook as she reached for the handle, but she forced herself to steady it. This was it. She was going to face whatever challenge Lucien had prepared for her. The door creaked open, and she stepped into a darkened room. The air felt colder here, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally across the floor. The little girl's pulse quickened as she looked around. She could feel the power around her, like a tangible weight pressing down on her. Lucien's voice echoed through the room. It's not enough to just have power. You need to know how to use it to defend what matters. Suddenly, the shadows in the room began to shift. The little girl's breath caught in her throat as figures began to materialize from the darkness. They were tall, their forms cloaked in shadow, their eyes glowing faintly with an eerie light. They stepped toward her, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were studying her. She stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. These were the dangers Lucien had warned her about, the enemies that would come for her, for the power inside her. Her hands tingled as she felt the energy within her stir, ready to respond to the threat. Lucien's voice came again, soft but firm. Focus. Remember what you've learned. Don't let fear control you. The little girl took a deep breath, grounding herself in the training she had received. She reached deep inside, feeling for the power that had become so familiar to her. The figures closed in, their movements growing faster, more aggressive. She raised her hand, and with a surge of energy, she released a burst of force, sending it toward the figures. It struck them with a loud crack, but they didn't falter. Instead, they advanced even faster. Panic rose in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had to control the power. She couldn't let it control her. The figures were closing in on her now, and she felt their presence like a suffocating weight. She had no choice. With a sharp breath, she let the power flow through her fully, directing it with every ounce of strength she had. The air around her seemed to crackle as she unleashed another wave of energy. This time, the figures staggered, their forms flickering in and out of existence as if her power was tearing through them. They screamed in distorted voices, their glowing eyes dimming, as they tried to retreat into the shadows. But the little girl wasn't finished. She had faced her fear before, and she wouldn't back down now. With a cry, she focused all the energy she could muster into one final strike. The figures screamed as they were engulfed in the force of her power, disappearing into the ether with a burst of light. The room fell silent. The little girl stood, breathing heavily, her hands still trembling from the exertion. She had done it. She had faced the enemy and defeated it. Lucien appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he observed the scene. You did well, he said, his voice low. You've learned how to defend yourself. But remember, this is only the beginning. There will be more challenges ahead. And next time, the stakes will be higher. The little girl nodded, though her heart was still racing. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. She wasn't the same person who had first stepped into this mansion. She was stronger now, more capable, and ready to face whatever came next. She had control over the power inside her, and with Lucien's guidance, she would continue to grow stronger. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a fighter, and she was ready for whatever the world would throw at her. Days turned into weeks, and the little girl found herself standing at the precipice of everything she had trained for. Lucien had taught her everything she needed to know to control her power, but the moment had arrived where she would have to use it for more than just self-defense. The world outside the mansion, the world that had once seemed so distant to her, was now encroaching on her reality. She had spent so many years hiding, running, afraid of the people who would hurt her. But now, she was no longer that helpless child. Now, she was a force to be reckoned with. Lucien had prepared her for this moment. He had told her it was time to face what lay beyond the mansion's walls. She had mastered the control of her power, but the true test was still ahead. She had to prove herself in the real world, where enemies and threats were not shadows that could simply be banished with a wave of her hand. These threats were real. They were dangerous, and they were waiting for her. Lucien stood beside her in the training room, his gaze sharp as always, but there was a hint of something softer in his eyes, pride, perhaps, or something deeper. You're ready, he said, his voice low but filled with certainty. What's next? She asked, her voice steady, but the underlying tension in her chest was impossible to ignore. Lucien's eyes darkened. You'll be facing a new threat, one that's much closer to home than you realize. It's time for you to leave the mansion. The little girl's breath caught in her throat. Leave? She had spent so many years in this place, training, learning, growing stronger. The thought of leaving it, of stepping out into the unknown, sent a jolt of fear through her. Yes, Lucien said simply. The time has come for you to face what lies outside these walls. The people who want to control you. The forces that would do anything to take your power. She nodded, her mind racing. She had learned so much, but there was still a part of her that wasn't sure if she was ready for this. Still, there was no turning back now. Lucien had prepared her as best as he could. It was time to put everything to the test. The little girl stood up straighter, her shoulders squared, her hands at her sides. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. Lucien gave her a small smile, something that felt almost like a reassurance. "I know you are." They walked through the mansion together, heading toward the large front doors. The little girl had never noticed just how imposing they were, standing tall and grand, with iron bars that had once felt like a protective barrier. Now, they felt like a gateway to something far greater. She stepped outside, and for the first time, the vast world beyond the mansion stretched out before her. The air smelled different, fresher, but also tinged with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Lucien led her down the path, toward a waiting carriage. The ride was silent, each passing mile taking them further from the only place she had known as safe. She couldn't help but glance at Lucien, wondering if he could sense her hesitation. But he said nothing. He only watched the horizon with the same steady, unwavering gaze that had become familiar to her. As the journey continued, she thought back to all the moments that had brought her here. The training, the battles, the lessons. They had all led to this. The little girl had become something different, something stronger. But now, she would see if that strength was enough. The carriage finally stopped in front of a grand estate, its towering gates opening to reveal a bustling courtyard. The little girl's heart raced again. She didn't know why, but something about this place felt different. There was a heaviness to the air, as though this place held secrets, hidden dangers waiting to be uncovered. Lucien stepped down first, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the sharp awareness of someone who had seen too much. "Stay close," he said, turning to the little girl. She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She had learned to trust him, but something about this place unsettled her. They walked through the estate, and as they neared the entrance, the little girl felt her power stir within her, like a spark that had been waiting to ignite. She wasn't sure why it was reacting this way, but she followed Lucien, every sense alert. Inside the estate, they were greeted by a tall man, dressed in dark, elegant clothes, his face unreadable. His eyes locked onto the little girl's, and for a moment, it felt like he was sizing her up, assessing her worth. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "We've been expecting you." Lucien stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "We need to speak with the head of the council," he said, his tone firm. "It's time." The man nodded and gestured for them to follow. The little girl felt the weight of the moment bearing down on her. This was it. This was what she had been training for. The council. The people who would stop at nothing to control her, to control the power inside her. As they walked deeper into the estate, she could feel the power stirring within her once more. This was her test. The real test. And there was no turning back now. Lucien turned to her just before they entered a grand, opulent room. "Trust yourself," he said, his voice low but filled with meaning. "You've prepared for this. You are ready." She nodded, her mind still racing but her heart steady. This was her moment, and she would face it head on. As they entered the room, the little girl felt the weight of the council's gaze fall on her. She was no longer just a child. She was something more, something dangerous. And she was ready to take her place in this world. The world that would either break her or make her stronger. But she wouldn't go down without a fight.